Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Sonic 2006 of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka the new DSO sounds like Magla.
And it kind of does. I just clicked on it. This is definitely surprising, not surprising.
Yeah.
All right, and I am the black metal guy, aka Vile Comet of Iniquity.
Is it like a really sleazy comet that hits?
Yeah, I'm a harbinger of doom. Okay.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
No, yeah, the new DSO. We're not covering the new DSO just because we're not especially interested in it, but yeah, I just skimmed through a couple tracks as I usually do just to see it, and it's like, wow, this really does sound like fucking McClaw, dude. Like, what is going on here on this record?
Yeah, you were saying you think they're trying to prepare to do a tour or something?
I think there's a lot of shit going on. So DSO is making a big thing about this new phase, the third phase of the band and shit.
Yes.
Well, okay, so they intro that third phase with a new record that sounds like weirdly accessible for DSO. They start sidelining Miko Aspo. They start bringing other people in to do vocals on other tracks and stuff. It feels like there's a move being made.
Interesting. Yeah, and I can see it as, I'm sure they would see it as sort of moving back towards more straightforward black metal, but not just rehashing, Infernal Battles.
Which is all that we want.
Yes, I think we decided, we were basically like the only left turn they could really take would be making a record that sounds like Infernal Battles, in which case we would cover it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Infernal Battles is my favorite DSO record. It's like my third favorite Gorguts record.
Or wait, you know what? It's Infernal Battles is Infernal Battles is sick. I think man. Absolutely.
But enough of that cool guy shit. We've got other cool guy shit to talk about. At least momentarily we do, because we don't have like an intro segment or anything. Oh, well, that's because we're keeping this episode nice and tight, because for those of you interested in supporting the show, we are recording a brand new Terminus Prime bonus episode tonight. Should I tell them what it's about? That's probably a better draw, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So tonight's Terminus Prime bonus episode will be a back-in-the-day review of two records, one being Absu's Tara, and the other being Bilskirnir's Wotansvolk. So kind of an interesting combination of records, barbaric, pagan, blackish metal, but executed in completely opposite ways. So
exactly. Yeah,
that should be a fun one. And if you want to be a part of that exclusive high-tier inner circle that is able to hear the wisdom that drips from our mouths like golden saliva, you can do that very easily with the 16 digits on your credit card. You can sign up on Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gets you access to the Terminus Prime bonus episodes. $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server. And $10 and up will actually get you access to voting on what you want the content of our bonus episodes to be. So just all kinds of great ways to be involved. We're less of a company, we're more of a family. And additionally, if you want to be cheap and just follow us on social media, you can do that. Me, the Death Metal Guy, on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, or the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal. So we've had a run now for a few weeks of the Death Metal Guy actually bringing death metal onto the show. What a weird fucking idea.
Yeah.
And today we've got something that, honestly, this is kind of one of my most anticipated records of the year. Ever since I heard this band's EP last year and we covered it on the show, I was like really excited to hear what these guys had next. So I am very happy to talk about the debut full-length by Astral Tomb titled Soulgazer, out on Blood Harvest. So last year we covered Degradation of Human Consciousness, which was a little 3-track EP by Astral Tomb that was, in a way, a kind of a teaser for this record. You know, I think they said something to the effect of, you know, this is like an exploration of ideas that are going to be on the full length. It seems almost, in retrospect, like kind of a rehearsal tape. Like, this is midway through them figuring the songs out.
You mean actually using a demo as a demo?
Yeah, I know. It's weird. What an insane... And not just as a way to sell limited edition, you know, tape drops.
Mm-hmm.
So last year,
or you know, a way to record a way to record an EP or a full length while taking the pressure off yourself.
Yeah, which is, I guess that's a little bit more fair, but still, it's like it's a fucking full length. It's fine.
But yeah, no, this is actually technically an EP, but it's basically a demo, right?
What degradation?
Degradation, yeah.
I mean, it's whatever, you know, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so the full length is finally here. So those who didn't hear the review last year, so Astral Tomb is a 3 or 4 piece. I'm not sure what the 3 piece right now. From Denver, Colorado. And I don't usually put too fine a point on this, but these kids are like really fucking young. Aren't they like 19 or something?
Yeah, they've got to be, like, I think they're just out of high school.
Yeah, and they've only been going since 2019. So in that time, you know, they put out their original demo, a little split they contributed a track to, the Degradation EP, and now the full length on Blood Harvest. So they're doing well for themselves. So, how would you describe, you know, since we covered it last year, how would you describe what you heard on that EP? Or should I just play a piece of it?
Well, we'll see if I can remember. Let's see. I mean, it was rhythmically rooted in slam and beatdown, but very unusual and kind of... You know, I think I described it as primordial chug music in some level. It was very instinctive music that had clearly been made by jamming and had probably been composed through jamming and then had improvisation in it. Dynamic group play, and had a lot of really abrasive, noisy power tool riffs from the first record, right?
A quick way to your heart.
Yes, yeah. So... I think we and, you know, maybe you found some different things about it that you latched onto.
Well, I mean, I thought that, pretty much the same things.
Oh, wait, are we talking about the last EP or the last full length? Wait, Degradation was, okay, I get it. The last one we reviewed was Degradation.
Yeah, that's the only one.
I thought of it as a full length because it was such a complete statement.
Yeah. Well, no, it's pretty short, though. It's like 20 minutes long.
Okay, sorry. I just totally goofed on that. Yeah. But no, I'm saying for the listener's sake, that might have been confusing.
Yeah. I latched on to pretty much all the same things that you did. Especially for me, just the bizarre sense of timing, this almost free time stuff that's going on, this very floaty quality to the music. You described it perfectly when you referred to it as dark side weed energy.
Yes.
So with that in mind, just to familiarize people, let's listen to just a little snippet of the final track off that EP, which was called Orbiting Fractals, and that'll kind of prepare us for the full length. So, keep in mind some of the sounds you heard there, because we're definitely going to hear more of them on the full length. So, when we covered this last year, I just found the whole EP so exciting and so interesting and fucking and weird without ever like straying from just real extreme metal. So I thought it was going to be an all or nothing thing with the full length. Either this is going to be one of my favorite records of the year, or it's going to be a complete fucking disaster. So I am very happy to say this album is fucking sick. It is rocketed onto my album of the year list, and they changed nothing about the formula. They just refined it. And now the full length is the definitive statement of this band, and I cannot fucking wait to see what people make of this thing, dude.
Yeah, I think this is great. I think the only difference is I think the noise is a little less prominent on this one. Obviously, I'm going to prefer the more abrasive tone on the sample you just played, but like it is also okay. That's a demo, and I feel like some of the sheer skreek and skronk and sort of shrieking sounds are a little less prominent here, which, you know, I liked those a lot, but that energy is definitely still here. I think this is a great record. It didn't make any of the missteps it could have, and it's just really exciting to listen to. I just put a big dumb smile on my face.
I was interested to see how you would react to this in kind of the full length format. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you'd start finding it tedious, but I'm glad to hear that you didn't. Although this is a relatively brief record. This is just over half an hour. It doesn't overstay its welcome at all. And I think it could take another track, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I would say my overall take is like there's parts of, you know, there are synth interludes and some moments that are very psychedelic or kind of prog rock that I could take or leave. I get that they're part of the formula. Not really my thing. As you say, though, this band has a very long hair approach to how they're doing things.
Yeah.
And, you know...
Oh, go ahead.
You know, that goes with the Dark Side Weed energy.
Yeah, no, this is... it's... It would be so easy for some of these ideas to really just, like, fall off the edge into just, like, stoner nonsense or something. Mm-hmm. But there's a real core of... one just like sounding really fucking evil most of the time. That really helps to sustain it. There's definitely, like you were saying, like I wrote, the long hair thing I think is really important here. The idea that it's like, yeah, this is really extreme death metal, and it's also got all of its like prog and psych touches, but those are never used to smooth over the rough edges of the music. And I guess the thing that became really clear for me on this full length is that this is, in essence, just the world's weirdest slam death band. Like, the DNA of this music is firmly rooted, like, overwhelmingly in, like, brutal and slam death metal, you know, with some augments from, say, like, immolation and slightly headier old-school death metal.
I think there's a lot of beatdown in it, too, but the side of beatdown that sounds like slam, I'm sure, like the slam-adjacent beatdown.
Yeah, the slamming beatdown, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe there is beatdown, maybe there is slam that sounds more like that just doesn't make its way onto this show. Yeah. But I find that I really enjoy these slams in a way that I don't necessarily with most down-the-line slam bands. In part, that's because there's a richer guitar tone. Mm-hmm. But in part, it's their specific way of playing it, which is a little more breakdown groovy than sort of stutter slam.
Yeah, well, I think the breakdown groovy stuff is one of the things that holds this whole record together. Because, like you said, it seems very clear that these are songs developed by jamming and then just playing them over and over again until the band is completely locked in, because some of the timing stuff that is happening, just like the EP, is like almost uncountable. These weird, minimal, spacious free time parts where you never know where the next beat is going to hit, but somehow they're perfectly locked onto it. That's the kind of thing you only get by smoking a shit ton of weed and playing in a garage for a couple of years, you know?
Yeah, this band has definitely, I guess I'll get into more about what makes this so awesome. But yeah, certainly the improvisatory and jam aspect of it is really key. So yeah, I'm sampling two. My sample starts before yours. And I'm sampling two parts that call attention to maybe the more primitivist side of this record, like maybe the less long hair parts, although they are extremely long hair. And I think you can compare, there's all sorts of references you can make, but these two passages you'll hear are basically kind of the same thing. They work in parallel ways, but it's calling attention to certain cool things that this band is doing that I really like. So this first one is from Transcendental Visions, which is like, that track also, a draft of that track appears on Degradation. The draft is 5 minutes and 49 seconds. The final version is 12 minutes and 55 seconds. Yeah, so good job. But they definitely, so you've got a sample from the back part. The album comes in hot with something that sounds like a quote from something I really, really like, and I can't figure out what it is. It's probably like a lot of sort of cranking, chugging riffs that I really like. But, basically they sort of crank up the guitars, and then they go into this like chain of beat downs or whatever, and then they go way out. So, yeah, it goes to some of their most sort of free, highly noisy, but also kind of psych jammy stuff, with sort of very loose, wiggly time signatures. And then my sample starts right when they're starting to dial it back in and escalate in intensity. So they start tightening it up through this sort of winding triplet slam. John, 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 with one of the other guitars kind of freaking out over it. And then, I mean, that's like what they called it in the late 60s. It was the sort of like freak out music, right? And and I use that term advisedly because when the big moment hits, when the big cathartic riff hits, it's just boom, 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 and the riff is being formed between the two guitars. There's not a bassist here, as far as I know. It's like, do you hear a bass?
I can't really. Maybe there's a track buried in there somewhere, but I can't really tell.
The guitars are both doing bassy things, basically, so it doesn't matter, right? And you get, one is holding down sort of, power chord-based low end, and the other is doing this out stuff that actually has more of the sort of heavy focused single string tone you'd expect from a bass, right? The guy who's doing the pick slides almost sounds more bassy there, but they I'm sure they are trading constantly, and so the riff, it's just 1 minor 3 1, right? So that is a minor third 1 or flat third, right? It's that's basically like the elemental blues scale power chord riff.
Yeah.
And everything else about the tonality there, everything else about the playing highlights the blues tonality. It's not a minor 1 flat 4. It's like a blue, or 1 flat 3. It's like a blues version of it. And it's just 2 chords. And when we talked about the last one, I remember comparing this band to the Stooges. Because of that sort of wild, improvisatory kind of heavy mid-tempo energy, like Funhouse era Stooges. This record, that was more of a kind of the Stooges were trying to make, when they first started playing, right? We're trying to make machine and noise music. But stuff before they even recorded was bringing a vacuum cleaner on stage, right? And this band is kind of does shit like that. But here, that just really sounds like a Stooges riff. That's the beginning of 1970. Is just bum 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 bum. It's about that interval, and. So yeah, this record sounds kind of like a modern Funhouse, which is really cool. And at the same time, right, I'm biased towards saying that sounds like a Stooges riff, but it also sounds like a billion other things, right? They're accessing a kind of, in addition to all the slamming stuff here and some cool trem riffs that come in various spots and the sort of fried noise playing, they really are accessing just phrases at the very root of hard rock, metal, and extreme punk music.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that while, a lot of the just, basic technique is made out of a sort of, slam and brutal death texture, you have to keep in mind this array of influences that's applying to that. Because I have no doubt that these are probably, even if they're younger guys, I bet these guys are, huge record collector nerds.
Yeah.
Because I'm definitely this is one of those cases where it's extremely plausible they're actually listening to the Stooges, or just listening to that sample. Yeah. I was thinking, especially with the kind of freak out guitar stuff, it reminds me of some of the noisiest stuff that Zappa did back in the day.
Oh, yeah, that also seems really valid as a comparison.
And honestly, it's interesting, kind of if you think about this song and particular, Transcendental Visions, it's almost arranged sort of like one of Zappa's epic suites in these very distinct movements, getting back toward, early but still very experimental rock opera days. And I think that's really cool. It shows a lot of ambition on the part of these guys. And the fact that they're able to string this whole nearly 13-minute song together, and it actually never gets boring. You never start checking the watch or anything.
No, not at all.
Well, yeah, because it's you don't know what the fuck is happening. It's not following a conventional arc of a metal song in any way.
Yeah.
Well, let me get to my...
Well, a lot of the experience is just oh boy, this is one of those almost things where you hope the song keeps going. It's oh boy, I hope they keep doing that horrible scraping thing.
Well, yeah, and it's
and then it's oh, they are, hurrah!
And it's what happens next? You'll have these... You'll have these moments of, brute, minimal repetition, but there will be these weird features going on that, keep you really fascinated by it, and then it'll take a complete left turn, but still feel contiguous within the song. These wandering kind of journeying songs. So let me do my sample off Transcendental Visions. This takes up, damn near half the record's running time, so we gotta do a couple samples of it. So shortly after your sample ends, we get a really weird psychedelic break. You get this like Doppler effect thing with the whole band moving between the channels with some throat singing stuff over it, and it's like, of course that's gonna happen. It's almost not surprising. But I'm picking up at the tail end of that where it picks back up, and like I was saying before, the moments of like brute simplicity. You're going to hear one of those here with a breakdown that's kind of nothing. Like, nothing happens, but the timing is so bizarre and fascinating, you're just transfixed by it. And also, I want to draw attention, before I forget, to the drumming on this record, which was clearly done stoned off this kid's ass with his eyes closed the whole time, and it works fucking perfectly. So one thing that I want to point out that's consistent across this record is, if our theory is correct that this is all done through jamming, and I'm like having a lot of trouble imagining how it couldn't be, they have really maintained the jammingest qualities of that. You'll notice that throughout this record, a riff will never, or almost never, start at the same time between the two guitars. It's almost always one guitar trailing off, starting a new riff, the other guitar kind of maybe doing a weird fill and catching up to it midway through or at the next repetition. Like one guitarist is just noticing that the other has slipped off onto something else, but kind of likes the interaction between the two things that are happening. That's something that happens a couple times in this sample, and it sounds fucking crazy when that huge kind of epic riff comes in at the end.
The trem riff, one starts the trem riff that sort of creeps up in the background, and then the guitar just does some like stutter, pause, slide thing. It's crushing.
Yeah, it's so eccentric, and it's so not metal in a way, but it's used to create crushing extreme metal,
Yeah, one thing this band has is just, we were talking about that with the Sternatus review last week, is that the Blazebirth bands have a sense of compositional freedom, right? Very focused music, obsessively focused music, but there just aren't, they have a sense for what the conventions are, then they just ignore them, right? In various ways, at various times. This band really, Astral Tomb is really opening things up in an important way. My buddy and I was actually playing him the Sternatus record, and we were talking about how, it's a shame how so much black metal or whatever gets bound within genre conventions, right? And that's not to say we want to hear genre-defined black metal that is mixed and matched with all these different parts of everything, right? Not pastiche, but just like ideas about how the songs are composed or played, right? You've heard me talking about like people should start incorporating more improv into black metal and extreme metal in general, right? These guys are doing it with the furthest reaches of death metal. Just the way they're writing the guitar parts. This is entirely written in counterpoint.
Yeah.
There are very few times when they're playing the same riff, and if they do, it's mostly like they land on the same 3 notes in the middle of passages that just meet for a second.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and like the arrangement of the band seems really interesting. Like it appears that 2 guys are doing guitars. One of them's the vocalist, but then the other one did some drums, and then there's another drummer. It's like I have no idea. What
it looks like one guy switched from drums to guitars.
Yeah, but on the record, they're credited as doing drums and guitars, Adrian. So
interesting.
We'll have to ask them at one point, because I clearly need to talk to these guys and just be like, "What the fuck are you Zoomers?"
Oh yeah, we got to do an interview with these dudes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But another thing I wanted to point out is like as we come into that sample, the way it slides off that weird throat singing part with just that really textured guitar, that's like a really nu metal technique, isn't it?
Yeah, which part exactly? Like right at the beginning of the sample?
Just when the kind of breakdown riff is starting, and you just have that kind of skittering pick scrape slide into it from the other guitar. It almost brings to mind like a Korn thing, like a textured Korn thing from the early records. Because you had some interesting things to say about another band kind of related to that.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt they listen to Korn. I mean, I think one thing that's going on with this band is like a good version of a phenomenon that's normally very bad, which is Zoomers forgetting rules about what's cool and what's not.
Yeah.
And so the bad version of that is kids being like, yeah, I'm like really into like Nirvana and the Beatles. It's like, oh God. Right. Right, but like the positive version of that is, or you know, this bizarre thing where it's now like cool to be like a mall goth nu metal person again. However, right, there are things of musical value in Korn, right, and there's certainly things of musical value in all sorts of '90s alt stuff that's been artificially separated off from metal by the kind of, you know, just by underground antagonism, right? So yeah, the idea that it connects to the coolest, most industrial parts of Korn totally makes sense. I mean, I think Primus also maybe like.
Oh yeah, I could definitely see like, Primus.
But you know, the most nu metal-y parts of Primus. But like the cover art seems to be telling us something, right? Which is think about Tool, right? And that, you know, that's it kind of in that territory of something like Danzig, which I was ranting about the other week, of bands that are clearly like informed by the same things as extreme metal, and often like listening to the same bands, channeling similar ideas, and yet are sort of, for whatever reason, just like off the table from the get-go. Like nobody even thinks about it as being relevant. This band probably likes Tool, and if not, they're doing things that are very much like that, and in a cool way, and accessing the most heavy, you know, accessing the parts of it that are the least butt rock.
Yeah,
right?
no, I mean, I can definitely see that. I mean, it's Tool is the vast majority of people our age or younger who are into heavy music. You know, anyone who claims they didn't have a Tool phase is fucking lying to you, because I absolutely did. I still.
I remember just reflexively looking down my nose at it, and then just as I spent more time driving in high school, just listening to that on the radio and be like, "Oh, this band's really good."
yeah, exactly. And the great thing is, like, some of these kids, like you said, have just shaken off all those kind of hang-ups that used to be common when we were coming up, and it's, you know, it's got great potential sometimes.
Yeah, you know, there's a place, the hang-ups were productive. There's a point to being rigid and hostile and artificially narrow, right? That's how you get, like, Morbid Angel or, you know, like, Sacramentum. but like you're not gonna. This is that opening. There's a good way of opening things up again, and this band is doing that, and they're making some of the most original music I've heard since we started doing this show.
Yeah,
it's So with that, let's go to a sample where I can really show you the Tool part. This is from Inertia, Crashing Through the Doorways of Eternity, and if I could, I'd sample the whole song.
Yeah, seriously, this is a great one.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, it's so cool. Like, here on the show we tend to talk about things on such a micro level, but the way these guys just kind of construct parts is so neat. Like, they've got such a great ear for cool things happening,
That's what I wrote in my notes. It's like they have a knack for doing exactly the right thing at the right time, but it's not the thing that the stylistic script tells you you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, I mean, that freak out at the end was sick, but right before that, right, there's the Tool part, right? Everything like, dum, 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 dum.
That's super Tool, actually.
It's very Tool breakdown, and it has that kind of like a bit blues swagger, but a bit like epic dark Dorian. I think that's a kind of riff you get to by jamming. Just that loose, low slanging openness to it. Mm-hmm. Like, it seems like somebody probably made up a version of that when they were playing, and then they just like riffed on that for a while till they got the final version.
Oh yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, is because there are so many of those bluesy touches across this record, and I think that goes back to the idea that maybe these guys are really invested in 60s and 70s music. Because we can talk about the experimental guys of that era, which they're certainly listening to, but all of it is coming from a blues rock base, and that stuff filters into the melodic ideas all the time.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back and find the blues riff. So, right, like, there's a blast thing that separates it from the big Tool part, but that sample starts sort of with this sort of accelerate, just like the sample before. They sort of come out of an out part, coalesce, and start crawling towards higher intensity. And it starts to take the shape of like a dun 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 dun.
It's like Funeral Doom Pantera, dude.
Yeah, that is a slam. That's a slam being played at Funeral Doom tempos, and it could be a Pantera riff. It could be the part of the riff to TVI from Funhouse by the Stooges, or it could be fucking Ted Nugent, right? Which is the same as saying Pantera, but
yeah. No, I think what you're grabbing onto really is just this like wonderful synthesis. So obviously, I mean, we've been talking about all this out stuff. Obviously, these kids know everything about death metal. Because that very opening part of the sample is extremely immolation to me, especially some of their mid to later stuff. Which is weird because a lot of the harmonic language here is kind of like early immolation. But I'm sure they're fans of the whole thing. And I'm sure immolation are fans of Tool, too. So obviously they're listening to a ton of that. They're listening to Incantation. They're listening to Morbid Angel. They're listening to all the classics, and they've synthesized all of that with their interest in some of these outside of metal styles. But at no point, if there's one thing I can say, at no point on this record will there be a clean guitar funky rock break. It's all fucking brutal.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
It's all weird and alienating and brutal and dark.
It's not attempting to convince, it's not attempting to quote-unquote transcend genre. It's just not limiting its idea of technique or phrasing, right?
Exactly.
This is an extreme metal record.
Oh, yeah, and they're into it being that. Yeah, I mean, you can tell with just how fucking heavy it is. So, well, actually...
wait, we should talk about the vocals, too, real quick.
Oh, yeah, I mean... Yeah.
We always forget to talk about the vocals, but the vocals are quite horsely. This is, that's a very deep tone that is louder than a lot of deep gutturals like that.
Yeah, no, it's really nice, but I guess I forget to think about it because it's so embedded in the music as like a textural thing, because there's like not a lot of lyrics per song.
I mean, the lyrics are probably just like space, death, esoteric phenomenon, which is what their themes say on Metal Archives. Right?
The lyrics for a couple songs are from the last EP are actually available, and you are correct. It is just like a few lines a piece of like weird, stoned out, just like DMT elf shit. You know?
Yeah. But the vocals, there are moments. Yeah, the vocals are textural, but there are moments when they come to the fore in a really heavy way. Where, and again, a lot of this music is just these sort of independently moving layers that occasionally sync up in, or not occasionally, like almost every 30 seconds sync up in these just really gripping ways. At certain moments, the vocals lay on a lot of heavy aggression, and, he just sounds older than he is. It's like a very...
Yeah, it's very impressive that
he's got a resonating chamber for that.
Yeah, like hitting that pitch, because, I mean, you're really not fully developed vocally until your mid-20s. The fact that he's able to hit those, like, sub-baritone pitches now promises even crazier shit in the future.
Yes.
So, real quick, my last sample, because, like I was saying, this is a death metal band. And really, in a sense, this is a brutal death metal band, fundamentally. So, I want to talk about the song Traversing the Wandering Star. So, remember when I played that bit of Orbital Fractals earlier at the very beginning? You're going to hear that, like, scrape breakdown riff come back. I think that part of Orbital Fractals was turned into Traversing. I also think these guys...
there's also the Tool riff comes back at... I was getting ahead of myself, but...
does it come back in Traversing?
The Tool riff comes back at the end of Ascending a Pillar of Light, at the end of the record.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think these are guys that are not concerned about the idea of reusing riffs or something, because they're always recontextualizing them. Like, I bet if you break this record down, you'll find repeated riffs across the various songs, but you won't even notice it while it's playing.
And why not? Like, they're sick.
Yeah, it's like if the riff works again, do it again. But so,
why is FromSoft reusing animations?
because they were right the first time.
Yes.
But Traversing the Wandering Star is one where the brutal death quality becomes very obvious. So we'll listen to this. I'll touch on some of the possible connections in kind of the brutal death scene, and we'll take it from there. Holy fuck, man. Just that.
Ding, 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 ding. I was following the left channel guitar the whole time, and it was so trippy.
Oh, yeah, no, that like, sequence that's basically nothing but pinch harmonics.
But but there's also this stuff coming in over the pinch harmonics, like... Bling, boing,
Maybe a key or something like that.
Yeah, it could have been keyboards, yeah.
Also, listening very closely, there is a bass. It's really down in the mix, but I could hear a couple places where it broke off from the guitars there, so I think there is a bass guitar on this record. In terms of brutal death, what is this reminiscent of? So obviously you got a little bit of like a Devourment circa Butcher the Week on here. The big things are going to be Dripping, which is a band that I probably mentioned on the show before. They're kind of a cult band that's gotten kind of a resurgence lately of just people looking back and realizing how interesting they actually were. They did one album, a couple EPs, and broke up, one of those stories, but it's a fucking incredible record. And the big one that I always come back to is Cephalotripsy. That idea of the lattice work of slams, that can be the base substance of your music that you build things around. And I don't know if anybody's ever approached that idea better than these guys have.
loving in a bundle of joy. Do I care to show you what I'm dreaming of? Do I dare to hook y'all with my love? Every little baby knows just what I mean. Living in division in a shift insane. Oh, mankind, calling from the fun house. Oh, mankind, I'm calling from the fun house. Oh, yeah, I came to play. Came to play. Blow save. Hey! Hey now! Let me in! One more time! Take it down! Take it down! Take it down! Oh, we've been separated. We've been separated. A little too long.
All right. And we are back with the new one, although it came out a couple months ago, from Ostots. This is Madarikazioa. Not sure how to pronounce that because it is Basque. And it is out on Altare Productions, the Portuguese label that has put out a lot of the Basque scene, including Ostots and the sort of brother band Owl's Blood, but also, of course, a lot of the Portuguese bands. Like, who were you mentioning? Black Salice?
Yeah, Black Salice, Candelabrum. They've done Ire. They've done a bunch of stuff.
Right. And we've covered those Portuguese bands on the show, also Morte Incandescente. But I remember for a minute I remember getting it twisted once and thinking that Ostots was part of the Portuguese scene, and then I was like, no, I mean, I'm sure they'd be like, no, we're Basque, right? But it's all the mountainous. It's there. The scenes bleed together through Altare, and it's all the mountainous regions that are proudly not Spanish. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, so this is one of these Basque bands. Owl's Blood is probably the more popular one. That one kind of really blew up a number of years ago because it was one of the first sort of extremely lush, melodic, kind of Seigneur Voland-based records that was in the sort of transition to the more kind of consonant-flowing modern style of BM. That was a big pivotal moment. Cold Night of Meditation. That was in 2014. And that's a really, really good album in that style. And Ostots is the sort of... But Owl's Blood has only done one thing. And so Ostots, for a long time, the guy who played guitar on Owl's Blood was doing the drums. And the guy who was doing the drums on... And here, the guy who was doing drums on Owl's Blood is doing the guitar and the vocals. So these are closely entangled bands. There's been a lineup shift, though. For the last two Ostots records, he's had different session drummers. And so this is his first with the session drummer Njord. And that has changed the sound of it, and what we'll talk about. So you can hear the relationship to Owl's Blood in the older Ostots stuff, but it's very different, and it's much more difficult music. I would say it has a misty atmosphere. These kind of liminal moods, and these suspended harmonies that will, like, periodically, like, sort of focus into big riffs, right? It's suspension, resolution. In that, it's a lot like... The structures are really influenced by the Blazebirth bands, especially, I think, Raven Dark. A lot of the harmonies seem very Raven Darky. But you'll hear that in this sample from 2015's Hill Argy, which was the last full length with the guy from Owl's Blood on drums.
Man, that is just a that is a terrible rip of that record.
Yeah, what is the so you described digital artifacting. Is that the kind of little tinkling sounds I heard coming in?
Yeah,
over it?
that's what you're hearing. It means that it was either it was ripped at like a really low bit rate or something went wrong during uploading, like some sort of corruption, but that's definitely not meant to be there, I can tell.
All right, cool. No, well, that's good, because I was like, where are those coming from? Is that like weird clinks on the cymbals? But yeah, that's good to know. I'm sure some of our listeners would have picked that up too. But yeah, so that is the track Gawa 1, Melancholia on Hill Argi. You could hear there that formula of, right, starting on these kind of difficult liminal harmonies, right? Not quite dissonant, but really sort of straining intervals, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get what you mean. There's a lot of stuff where it's not fully resolving the melody in the traditional way, but it's like it's gesturing towards the resolution. You can kind of hear it in your head, even if they don't.
Yeah,
it.
Yeah. It goes. So it shifts between. It goes from one kind of almost queasy dissonant thing into a more kind of romantic suspended thing, but still with this high tension, back into the sort of more dissonant riff, and then just drops, right? Big, very deliberate resolution into this massive kind of forest style riff. Mm-hmm. And then speaking of bands with very free composition, right? They really understand how like Forrest would write or whatever, right? That riff has the big slow part, and then halfway through he changes beats to do an elaboration on it at a higher tempo, right? And then finally at the end it drops into like the big Signor Voland riff that everyone's been waiting for, right? So you can hear how Ostots is one of the. You could hear how this is a cornerstone for the modern underground, right? Mm-hmm. Just the nexus of sort of French and Slavic stuff, and this kind of like remote and strange, but still kind of powerful production, right? Really woody, boxy guitar tone, and drums played in this kind of wild and a little bit like ragged and very melodic way. So that's a tonality, right? This record sounds very different. Just the sheer sound quality is very different, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, the production quality is a lot more polished. But I would say that the big thing that I'm hearing, because I'm not really familiar with Ostots before listening to this record, this is, in a sense, like even more minimal than that record. It's a very, well, I mean, to a degree, it's a very lateral move. This doesn't sound like a band trying to build off that. It feels like veering off in a different direction.
Yeah, you can still hear the penchant to refuse resolution.
Yeah,
is like, if anything, that is brought out here. But it's applied to very different kinds of melodies and chords and just a different sonic palette in general, which has a lot to do with Norwegian symphonic black metal. So the personality of the band here is still very much intact, but it's using really different raw material. And, there's some Emperor here, but there's a ton of Kvist, especially the kind of most vertigo-inducing kind of sweeps and turns in Kvist. So yeah, this is a what did you? I thought that you might hate this, but would probably end up liking it because of its sort of single-minded eccentricity.
Yeah, well, you wrote the notes on this one before I got to it, and based on what you were saying, I was expecting something, you say that it's difficult in the notes, which I can definitely understand to a degree, but I was expecting something, Eisensker adjacent or something. I was expecting something, without anything to hang on to. But structurally...
Go
ahead.
Oh, well, I feel like Eisenskir's way less difficult than this. That's like very sort of riff-directed.
No fucking way, dude. Eisenskir's way more difficult. Eisenskir's one of the most difficult things you've ever brought onto the show.
Oh, it's because of the sound. It's because of the sound quality, isn't it?
To a degree, and it's also just this, like, blunt bashing for an hour and a half, so...
Yes, well, I know you don't really like the kind of riffing, but it doesn't have the, I mean, yeah, well, we can talk about that as a reference point. Right, so you were expecting something like this, and this is more up your alley in certain ways. Yeah, so, in what ways?
Structurally, this is like a ton of stuff that I really like. Very kind of, it's very blocky in a way. It's very direct and straightforward, and it's all about, it's all about harmonic depth, ultimately. And those are things that I like in black metal records. I mean, you could describe a lot of bands that I love in that same way. I mean, you can fucking describe Sargeist in that way, basically. The difference is that Ostots, at least on this record, well, one, there's that penchant for never resolving the melody, which I imagine could probably get to people. But I think ultimately what we're hearing here is just black metal as it sounded like as we were coming up, in the 2000s. I remember a lot of records that had similar kind of melodic qualities to this. The melodies never fully resolve, but you already know that resolution in your head. You don't need that last chord to seal the deal for you. There's a lot of riffs that kind of loop into themselves in interesting ways on this, and on a riff-by-riff basis, a lot of this is just consumed by huge walls of, like 4-string block chords, kind of in the BBH style, but also a little bit like that Oriflamme record that we both like so much from last year. Obviously, this is...
Well, if you say 4-string block chord, I think more of Hate Forest than BBH.
Yeah, I mean, that too. I mean, I think a lot of stuff on, like, Forest or Branicald was done like that. But,
I guess that's true. They would go extend things into that.
Yeah.
Or something, yeah.
So, I guess my ultimate impression is, what this reminds me of is, kind of like you said, Scandinavian symphonic black metal, but with most of the symphonic stuff stripped out. This even reminds me a little bit of some Slavic symphonic stuff. Like if you listen to To the Gates of Blasphemous Fire by Nocturnal Mortem, and you stripped away a lot of the excessive orchestration, you'd have something that wasn't really dissimilar from this.
I was actually wondering if the Slavic stuff might be an influence. But yeah, the keyboards here, there are keyboards here, and when they're used, it's often very effective. But it's usually textural, and occasionally they'll come to the forefront in a very dramatic way. But it's never... You will never get, like, symphonic BM hooks.
Yeah, well, it's also because, like, the synths that are here, they're just using, like, the same patch. You're not dealing with, several layers of keyboards. It's
right.
One
it's
thing
not
to provide harmonic backing, and that's it. So,
yeah, so...
I did end up actually really liking this, though.
That's awesome.
I'll have to see what it does in terms of staying power, because this is, in a sense, extremely simple, rigorous music. But let's listen to some more, and maybe I'll find out by the end of the review.
All right, so let's start off. Let's see which of our samples comes first. It looks like mine. Okay, so we're going to start off with one that starts with something that sounds like one of those classic, one of the more sort of tense and suspended Ostots riffs from that classic stuff, like the Hillargi era. It will be recognizable to you as an Ostots riff and have some of that 2010s underground kind of vibe. But very quickly, it locks into the thing it's going for here. so do you hear him just kind of laying on that blast there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the really significant differences between this and that little bit of the last record is the drumming on this is much, much more relaxed sounding. Even though it is faster, it's more extreme in some ways, it feels a lot more laid back. So while it was playing, I just looked the guy up. He's got a 20-plus year history and, 24 bands, so we're dealing with a really accomplished guy.
I was going to say, it sounds, the way to describe it is, I like that kind of, punky black metal drumming on the last record, but, or sort of Capricornacy. Mm-hmm. But this guy is just, it's an authoritative drum sound, which relates to that, like, it's faster in some ways, and he's hitting harder, but it's also more relaxed. Mm-hmm. And that works really well to help these passages like that, of these very long, winding chord progression things, that it helps those carry a lot of weight.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, when you're dealing with stuff as blocky as this, mm-hmm. both in terms of songwriting and in terms of riffing, there does need to be a certain panache and musicality in the surrounding material. And I think the drums mm-hmm. do that really well on this record. Small things, just little fills, little cymbal runs and stuff, but they add something for the mind to pay attention to immediately while also absorbing these very elongated block chord structures.
Yeah, for sure. And it helps, in the middle of that, he intensifies the blast, mm-hmm. Which is cool. But yeah, so and that's a really cool chord progression. Very Kvist. That's a good example of a riff that's way longer than it seems to be. It seems like an A-B structure, but really it's the whole series of two similar chord progressions. The A and the B thing are the same riff.
Well, one thing that came to mind, kind of a left field comparison, but a lot of the chord ideas across this record, but especially here, kind of remind me of Xasthur in a way.
God.
Yeah, like Xasthur is using similar kind of harmonic arrangements, especially on some of his later records. Now, neither of us like Xasthur, but, I can recognize that he had an idea.
I guess I enjoyed, I did listen, right when I was getting into BM, that's one of the things that was around, and I mean, right when I was getting into it. Yeah. So I think I did listen a fair amount to a demo comp of his, or a comp of some of his earlier recordings. I can't remember what it was. And I think I enjoyed it somewhat. But yeah, no, Xasthur, neither of us is a Xasthur guy.
Yeah, but
I think maybe it was A Gate Through Bloodstained Mirrors.
That was very popular. Might have been that, or Funeral Being, or something like mm-hmm. that. But there's something about the way this guy arranges his big block chords, especially when he has the synth backing, that mm-hmm. reminds me a lot of Xasthur's later stuff, where it was a lot more open. Yeah.
He's just not doing the Xasthur play the pretty consonant melody and then, fuck it kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and he's not trying to be DSBM either. So.
Right, he's just doing the kind of, difficult chord changes and sort of swirling murky keys.
Well, I guess well, it's interesting. I mean, getting to this concept of difficulty, I mean, nothing on this record is really dissonant in any way.
Bum, 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 bum.
I mean, it's dark. It's dark Conan music, but it's not really. I don't think of that as necessarily difficult. Difficulty for me is about weird technicality and really fucked up harmonic arrangements, but a lot of this is contiguous. It's just, I think at this point we're so used to so much black metal sounding very flowery and sounding very immediately appealing that it's oh no, this is just what black metal used to be,
Well, I might be hearing it relative to my idea of the parts that are of those parts in the older Ostots records that really set it apart from... The older Ostots was really set apart from a lot of more kind of melodic early... was marked as more serious in many ways than a lot of the stuff in a very similar genre vein that was working with kind of those sliding two-string chords and whatever, by having those kind of intense hanging in the air intervals. And so to me, it seems like this entire record is made of those. I get if you're coming in. So I'm hearing it relative to his past stuff. It like doesn't have the sort of focusing consonant melodies. Right?
Yeah, it doesn't have the Seigneur Valland riff at the end of the song.
Right. To me, it seems like it's made entirely of these kinds of, like the goal was kind of take just the first set of stuff and use it to construct this kind of like landscape of peaks and pinnacles where there's no place to rest, right? And the storm is maybe... Storm is never quite breaking, at least until the end of the album, but it's constantly threatening.
Yeah. Something I wrote in the notes as a reference point to this would be, if you go back to Moribund Records in like the mid-2000s, if you're into this, I think you'd find a lot of stuff there that you would like. Like, not necessarily specific bands, because there were so many like random one-off albums released by that label, but a lot of it had kind of similar harmonic contours to this.
You mentioned Terrorism in the notes.
Terrorism, just kind of like a throwaway possible reference. There was a lot of stuff in the 2000s that sounded kind of like this, and a lot of it came from the US. I thought of Terrorism immediately, just because I've been listening to them lately. Terrorism is more aggressive. You know,
Terrorism is kind of deathy.
Yeah. But if you break it down into kind of the simpler incarnation of those riffs, you get chord structures that are very similar to this, I think.
You know, a thing that it also reminds me a lot of, and that I bet these guys are into, is Cult Offensive.
Oh, yeah. No, there's parts on this that seem like directly Cult Offensive.
Which, again, is a built of only the most dissonant parts of 90s black metal, but is still very listenable. For somebody like us, very listenable.
See, Cult Offensive is more difficult than this is, to me.
Oh, yeah, to me, that's more like, aha, riff. This is...
Okay,
I'm
getting an idea in my head about where we differ, then.
Yeah. This will, yeah, and I can... My last sample will show you a place where I feel like it comes across as more immediate to me. But, you know, and that's not to say I actually find listening to this record difficult, right? I mean, it's like, it's enjoyable.
It's a descriptive term.
It's sort of, it has to do with that sort of deferral of certain kinds of big physical moments or releases. Yeah. And anyway, though, why don't we go into your next sample?
Well, that's a perfect segue, black metal guy, because I'm going to talk about sort of like minimalist execution and the lack of big moments, quote unquote. So we're going to go to the next track, Bidiak Darai. So the way I see it, there's basically three modes of riffing on this record. We've heard one of them with the huge sustained kind of block power chord stuff. And now we're going to open this third track on the record with one of the other modes, which is pretty aggressive, borderline thrashy palm mute stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of like the arrogant thrash thing, you know, House of Atreus, you know, that sort of thing. And it's very strange, because with that sort of more technical right hand work, you expect something more elaborate to happen on the left hand as well. No, they're formatted kind of like those blocky power chord arrangements. They're very straightforward. They're just propulsive and rhythmically aggressive. So let's hear what that sounds like. So I find the kind of following this thread of this being Ostots' quote-unquote symphonic black metal record, I find the palm mute riffs on this album really interesting. Specifically because they are like palm-muted symphonic black metal riffs, which is they are designed to be a sort of a holding pattern for a more elaborate orchestration over them. But that never arrives. And they sit on these individual palm-muted riffs for like a pretty long time, given how straightforward and simple they are. So I think this is interesting because, that kind of riff is used as a transitional riff. It'll be in a song for 15 seconds and then it's gone. You forgot that it was here. Here, Ostots sits on those riffs for such an amount of time that you're forced to consider them as like meaningful parts of the song, not merely a holding pattern for whatever elaborate gothic orchestration you have over it, but to just sit with one of those very straightforward palm mute patterns and consider it. And it's like, I don't even think they're necessarily great riffs, but that idea has some sort of hold on me. I think that's really interesting.
I know exactly what you mean. It has that. What it doesn't do is it doesn't lock into a thrash riff. Right? It's not really a headbangy part. It's not a... it doesn't resolve the tension. The only thing they do that sets it apart, often in the symphonic black, if I remember it correctly, those kinds of chugging sections often are just on one chord, or following usually
following the bass notes of the orchestral melody.
Sort of simple chord changes often. This, he's moving the root notes like the rest of his riffs, which makes it so it gives it that specifically black metal quality, but it's a little more active and riffy than the symphonic black. That's really the only difference. The other thing that's interesting is that, like, as much of a lateral move as this is, his hand is still all over, the recognizable hand is still here. His old stuff had palm mutes in it too. Hilargi actually starts with, I believe it starts with a really kind of soaring, almost Morricone type riff that has palm mutes in it. And so he's never had the black metal hang up about, oh, this or that can't be on black metal, right? He's always been down with the chug. But it's always been in this very black metal-y kind of, scraping, scraping percussive chug.
It's got that airy quality. It's not digging into the lowest note. It's, providing contrast.
Yeah, although on the old record it was a more classic heavy chug. It just was, but it was performed with that lightness to it. But, on the old record it was more headbangy than this, actually. Even though the context around it was way, very ethereal in some ways.
Yeah. Well, I think this whole idea of... I don't know. This is a really interesting record just to consider as an important music critic. The idea it is a very simple elemental idea. What if we take the common metallic motifs of symphonic black metal and basically scrape away the symphonic element, so you're just listening to these kind of simplified primordial takes. These demo cuts of what would theoretically later be black metal songs. Because I'm listening to some of this stuff, and it's like, oh, this kind of reminds me of stuff of, like, Dimmu Borgir's Stormblast. Just, you strip away all the melodic excess, and this is what you're left with. And that, in itself, is an interesting question to consider, I guess.
Yeah, I hear that. So, we want to go to your next one, I think.
Yeah, sure. So, as I was saying, you've got three main modes of riffing on this album. You've heard the big block chords, you've heard the palm-muted stuff, and then at the end of that sample, you heard the third version, which is what's going to start the fourth track, the sample from the fourth track, Odal Igari, which is kind of interesting, complex, arpeggiated arrangements, and this one that I've chosen is actually one of the most complex on the record. He does a lot of really interesting arpeggio work throughout this. I think there's a lot of stuff on this record that is arpeggiated, but there's so much delay and reverb on the guitars. Sometimes it just sounds like chords if he's playing it too quickly. Here you can still tell it's an arpeggio, but then it moves in different directions. And we'll talk a little bit about what I think the central thesis of this record is and what's kind of grabbing me as a listener. So, to kind of sum up my feelings about this record, I think that its trademark, the thing that it is constantly obsessing over, like the musical focal point of this, is the refusal to resolve. Sort of Ostots' idea of the infinite riff, but it's infinite because it literally never reaches a conclusion.
Right. Each thing that seems like a riff is just part of the one riff that's the whole album.
Yeah. And I find that really interesting, which is sort of counterintuitive because I like stuff that is generally so kind of consonant and satisfying. But it was like I wrote in the notes, there's riffs from Dark Funeral that start in the ways that most of these riffs do. There'll be the kind of intro blast riffs to tracks. Mm-hmm. But they'll always have, this little like black thrash turnaround at the end. Something to kind of clip it off. Remove that and you just have these blocks of chords floating in 0G. Kind of across the soundscape of the music. And the idea of pursuing that idea so rigorously that nothing ever concludes, and not just that, but that it's like sort of deliberately disquieting in the way that it never reaches a melodic resolution, that's a really intriguing thing to focus an entire record on. And I think I really appreciate that, because it gets me considering musical arrangement very seriously and what it means when you do that,
Yeah, it's daring, and I think you're getting at the same thing I was getting at when I talked about the mountain landscape, right? It's like just these sort of like jagged lines, ascending, descending, winding, turning around. One big plane, one big visual plane descending into another. If you look at the album cover, right, this is a great cover.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And it's just between... The covers have always been good, but this one's a little different. It's more abstract. It's got just the silhouette of, looks like a pass between two slopes. You got a bit of the left one, and then most like this steep ascent on the right, and a lightning crashing down over it. And what you're looking at is the elemental forms in both of them, and they're forming part of the same thing. The lines of the left slope, the lines of the right slope, the line up the line down from, and the two lines down from the sky, they form a kind of irregular trapezoid. And it's framed with a partial frame, a partial cube, or partial square outline border put around, just calling attention to the geometry of it. This is this is an attempt to grasp, natural force at the root, right? Beyond the organic. And that's like, and so, you get that sort of steep, sheer, jagged ascent thing throughout this record.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. This is remarkably good at musically depicting the subject matter of its cover.
Yeah. So let's go into, I'm probably going to try to order this because it's beautiful, the cover. Let's go to, I'm going to order it on a vinyl.
How many
let's
vinyls
go to,
do you have?
So let's go to, second to last track, which is kind of the climax, which we can talk about, or at least a period of high drama. This is Giza Diaren Erel, and you're going to get, this is the closest maybe the album gets to locking into more of a tonal center. And, as Death Metal Guy just pointed out, it never totally does. Oh, man. So, the more centered moment there was at the beginning of the sample, right? It drops into this kind of power chord drone, with a bit of a Kvist or Hate Forest kind of vibe, just like, like just three chords turning it around at the end, just classic sort of second wave style riff with, and that sort of, that hits root tonality. But even though it's hitting root tonality, it's still a dissonant, driving riff that seems like it's going somewhere. And the keys there are doing the work of just hanging over it and keeping that tension going, even there.
And when and that riff does sort of release, but it just releases towards this awesomely evil kind of like really early Graveland triplet thing, you know, and you know, the keys come in swirling over it, and the vocals just like awesome, still high tension, and then after that, it's like nope. We're going. It keeps climbing after that with more of those chugs and keys, like an ascending chug structure.